Hi, I'm Greg. So, basic concept is that types of providers are a great way for extending Puppet to control more and more rather than doing various things such as execs. If you start doing a bunch of execs, you should probably look into types of providers. However, my topic's a little bit more towards managing your configuration files. I'm very much not a fan of templates, and we'll get into that. So anyways, Greg, so I've been doing some of this stuff for a little while. On a lot of the things. That's pretty much me right there. So, the general flow of the talk, I'm going to start out just talking about how things kind of were for some of us more recently than others, some of the fun things that we had to deal with, and then what's currently available, and then some things that might be coming down the pipe. I'd like to let you know, my throat's a little jacked up right now, so if I cough or sound weird, I apologize about that. At my last job, one of the first things that we had to manage inside our database stuff was syscontrol settings. And so we would have a simple entry like this, and we would need to change it. And when I got there, this is the kind of entry that was buried inside the spec file for our VM for the database, which, generally speaking, looks okay. Basically, we're going to take the setting that's there with any value. We're going to store that value, that way we know what was there. And then we're going to set the new value. You run this, and we have the first page is now this little notice, which works great. Everything looks fine. Until the next time we install the RPM. And it just progressively got worse. And to be honest, I really don't feel like putting the effort into figuring out. I'm sure somebody could, but there was no obvious reason why it was matching it again. So, moving on to configuration management, we were like, hey, now we can just manage this file with templates, which is awesome, especially when you mix it with .d directories, which syscontrol didn't used to have. So, syscontrol was still funky because you had to manage this file that still had a bunch of default system stuff, and I know how to go move that in the Puppet, even though I didn't want to change any of it. And just so I could change these settings from my database provider. But then, if you're in a shop that supports multiple distributions, you support Debian and CentOS, you support, CentOS 4 through, now 7 as of today. So, your template management can get a little hairy if you're trying to support a lot of distributions, depending on the application. Some applications, not a problem at all. You've got one version, it changes barely, you're great. So it would be really nice if we had a method that was nice and potent, it was safe to rerun multiple times, you could easily dissect and say, I want you to change that value, just that value. Supported in multiple languages, and worked inside or outside of the configuration management. That's pretty hard, it's a very Herculean task, and so that's where Team Hercules comes into play. Team Hercules is a group that implemented Francis Geraldo. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. He wrote not a white paper, anyways, whatever you call it for school. I didn't go to college, so I don't know. Sure, thesis, that works. David Ludercote, who now works at Puppet Labs on Razor, actually took that, it was a dissertation. I don't know how I remember that at all. From Francis, and implemented a tool called Augeas. Dominic and Raphael have since extended that tool. So Augeas came into play. So what Augeas is it's a C library that gives you programmatic interaction with your configuration files. If you can define in a consistent state what that configuration file should look like syntactically, you can write a lens for it. And it's provided in a basic tree structure. You could technically even go write a wrapper around Augeas that gave you like a regedit view to your entire Etsy directory, which is kind of cool concept, but nobody's doing it because everybody hates regedit. So it's primarily a command line tool, but also language bindings, which makes it really useful if you get everything lensed up. So by lensing all the things, what they've done is they've actually gone and there are now default lenses for a lot of things. And to be honest, I took this snapshot before PuppetConf last year. It's probably bigger now. And so all of those are default lenses that are available right now. You can manage these configuration files without having to understand anything about how to write a lens, which is awesome. And if your configuration file is not on there, what they've also done is created some very generic lens concepts that can be realized as libraries inside the lenses to configure other lenses. So the summary of this is, you don't have to know how to write lenses. There's lots of stuff out there already that will probably manage your configuration file. Because most of your configuration files probably fall into those unless you're using YAML, which is actually really hard to do this with because it doesn't necessarily care about the spacing, or when it overly cares about the spacing, one of the two. I just know that we did it with Cobbler and it caused a breaking release. So that earlier send example, re-implemented using the Augeas type inside Puppet, which is an existing type that's been there for a very, very long time, is implemented in a simple, I've got a description, the file, what my check is, and then what my change is supposed to be. Nice and idempotent only runs, when the only if is true. You can even take that and make it a little bit more generic, so that, and this is actually some of my old code before Augeas Providers, which I haven't mentioned yet. Anyways, makes a nice little simple call. You can reuse it, and now I've got everything in that file covered with this simple defined resource. You can even get a little bit more complex. Another real example that we used to use. And you've got your different matches for it based on ensure. I'm only specifically working with the allowed groups. And it's allowing me to individually add the groups at different spots inside the configuration. So, I have pop drops and I so you're going right now. Yep, I'm good. Thank you very much. So, going back to the you don't have to write the lenses, these are some of the comments that when I've brought up Augeas to people both at work and just in general, you kind of get the approach back that, well, lenses are hard. And that's why that list is there. A lot of work has gone into simplifying it so that you as a consumer don't have to worry about the lenses. They're there, they work, they cover a lot of use cases. XPathing is pretty hard, kind of. But once again, we try to make this as simple as possible for you. Because as a consumer, you shouldn't care what's going on. Like, you don't care how Puppet's implementing the idempotent in a lot of cases. You care that it's doing it. Same thing here. So we're making it easier. And this is where Augeas Providers comes in. So Augeas Providers is a module that you can download from the Forge. You include it in your manifest. It's written in Ruby, so that there's a lot of use cases with some configuration files that are better covered by having just that kind of logic pathing that you can do straight with Ruby code rather than traditional DSL. And then, and it's heavily tested. It off and on took me like a year to finish my PAM on Augeas Provider because I'm not good with RSpec testing. And that was the last thing to do was write all the RSpec testing. I just never got around to it. So that previous example, completely Augeas Provider, we don't need the defined resource anymore. It's just that simple call, which is almost identical to the one that was for the defined resource, but you now don't have to do a defined resources. You just bring in Augeas Providers, you're covered. And the complex example is also that simple now. So here's a handful of the modules that are, or the handful of the types and providers that are in Augeas Providers right now. They cover, pretty regular use cases. Hosts, managing the host file with the default type is touch and go for some people, so this is really helpful. SSHD config, there's actually another SSHD config set that has a separate one, I can't remember what it's called. It's for the host-specific routers. And then shell bars, just in general, covers almost any INI file. So you can just use that provider, specify your file, and you've got your file config. Puppet off, really useful. The syslog, Augeas Provider covers both our syslog and syslog. The grub kernel parameters is really helpful. I know that I've written several defines over the years for that. And PAM is the one that just got added a couple months ago. Because I finally sat down and wrote the tests. So you can get Augeas Providers by doing a module installer and loading it from Git. Nice, simple, easy process. So coming to the future, I'm going to hit another cough drop. Coming to the future is going to be Augeas Providers 2. The long-term goal of Augeas Providers is to try and make it easier for people to write custom types of providers in their module rather than everything going into the Augeas Provider main module. So you may not necessarily want all of these. The exact path for that implementation is not totally laid out yet, but it's being worked on. And I did not add a slide deck for a current feature thing. As of Puppet 3.4, Augeas is now like 4 times faster. For anybody that has looked at performance issues with Augeas, before 3.4, it had to do a separate connection for every Augeas call to the file, and as of 3.4, it does a shared file descriptor, and so a significant increase in performance. So, yeah. So, in this case, next is 2.0, and the minimized deduplication is actually greatly improved as of a little while ago. The modules are much simpler to write now. I need to reorder my slides apparently. The generic library is partially done. It's still not tied to the point where you can include it from another module. You still have to do it inside Augeas Providers, and which is what's necessary for the last item. So you can contribute to Augeas Providers. The biggest way is to use it. Really use it, report bugs, provide additional use cases and such to the community, so there's more reason to grow it. And if you want to be really adventurous, you can help write new providers. There's at least 2 good examples right there of things that need to be, would be nice to get added. Anything where you ended up writing a simple defined resource to manage a config file inside your environment is probably a good use case. I don't think I actually have a slide called questions. So at this point, before I go any further on that, I'm just going to ask, does anybody have questions? So, Camp to Camp, which is who Raphael works for, actually has a set of, beginner, medium, and advanced type classes for Augeas. You can find out more from their website. They're based out of France, but they do travel if necessary. And there's several paths that you can go for more information and help about Augeas Providers. So we'll leave that at that. Mark. So I figured that I could just show a couple examples of some stuff I actually wrote. Yes, I need to stand up. I'm sorry.
Video on session?
Yes, that was.
Thank you.
Okay. So here's a simple definition. I'm setting a post entry, for example, just to, at this point, non-existent IP. I'm going to set route to mail or portal mail to my address. And turn on SSHD, and then I'm going to set this so that every SSHD type or resource that gets defined will notify SSHD. And then I'm going to configure my SSHD. I'm going to turn off the login, hardcode protocol 2. I'm going to change where I've got my authorized key files into a more central location outside home directories, and I'm going to turn off password authentication. So right now, I can SSH in, it's pulling it out of my home directory. But then apply. So you see all the applications in place. And then I'm not going to be able to get in. So I'm not able to get in on purpose because that's the SSH authorized keys. It's not group readable. Security permissions. There you go. And so nice and simple. I didn't have to manage any templates. Don't have a whole bunch of stuff. It's just, this is literally what my config should look like. And it's done. To me, that's like the essence of configuration management, is when I can look inside of my manifest and say, this is how my system is configured. If I have to go dig through a bunch of templates and follow a bunch of logic, to me that's, I don't like that as much. And this is easy to reset. Everything back to where it was. The way Augeas Providers works is it actually takes your entire effectively the config file, and it can turn around and makes every entry a resource. And so here's, you actually see that on there, okay? Here's an example of what that file looks like. And that's without technically having anything there. That's just running the resource list. Trying to put time to long hands. But no, if you don't have any other questions, kind of covers it. So the question is there a plan to replace the parsed our parsed provider, or yes, provider with Augeas. That is a Puppet Labs question. I actually have no idea. I don't think that there's any immediate plans to do so now.
So, one of the things that I don't know about is when you have this list of parts out here, and it's just the values that are entered in that manifest are present.
Correct.
Plus any, so what about default values of the protocol and SSH they would generally have to fall back to V1. That's not present at all.
Yes, if it's commented out and falling back to the defaults, it will not be displayed. It's strictly representing what is actively configured in the files. One of the benefits with the types of providers, you saw in the example, I added the comment to it. In theory, you could write the type in such a way that it could actually look into all the commented out, so like the way SSHD is, all the defaults are pretty much commented out already. So that way, when you're going and looking at it, you know what the defaults would be. Theoretically, you could write it to actually loop through all the comment fields, looking for the one that was there, and uncomment it, and put the file in. I'm not sure if you could probably, I guess, at that point, even expose it. I'm just not, that would be interesting. I don't know.
That actually exposing it to Augeas is one of the things that I thought about in the past building. Obviously, it's not doing it.
Right. I think the hard part there would be the fact that the things that are commented out are not always a config entry. And comments are sometimes just comments. So, but theoretically, you could probably do something. Is there any other questions? Okay. Very good.